Hey everyone, and welcome to the GRC Room for 5 questions. I'm Mike Andrews here once again with Karina Klever, and we're happy to welcome Ayoub Fandi. Ayoub is the Security Assurance Automation Team Lead for GitLab. He also hosts the GRC Engineer podcast and newsletter. And his LinkedIn content is really insightful. But if you're not following him already, I recommend you do that. How are you doing today, Ayoub?
Doing great. Thanks a lot for the intro, and really excited about answering those great questions you have for me.
5 of them, they're all pretty good. So Karina, without further ado, let me hand it off to you for a brief intro, and if you want to get into the first question.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us and thanks for having us. And I'm Karina Klever with Klever Compliance. We do compliance management as a service, all kinds of GRC competencies. Why don't we go ahead and get into the first question? What do you think is the part of the cyber GRC business that companies struggle with the most?
Very easy answer. I would say TPRM. For me, by far, it's probably the area where there's a combination of 3 things. I would say one is it's been underfunded compared to other areas. I think risk has good tie-in to enterprise risk management and how the CISO reports to the board. It's very easy to fund it. Compliance, bottom line, more and more now with automation platforms tying quickly GRC work to the bottom line, so easy to fund. Governance kind of is all across, but is also related to policy management, so it can have a wider impact on the company. And I would say TPRM, it's under the GRC team, and the main issue is because a lot of it was based on old school supply chain management. You have this questionnaire, you have this process that can be manual and very cumbersome on both sides, reviewing and also what you push to your vendors. And I don't really see innovations is coming, but what I would say is the ratio between the time spent and the assurance that you provide back to the business is extremely poor. I really see that as the area where we need the most amount of work.
And I'm going to second that. I think TPRM is one of the areas that I believe is the biggest risk to our industry as a whole, because especially in the US, there's these legalese, big, huge pitfalls between the subservice organization. When you bring on a vendor, they could be sending your data to their vendor, and they may be sending it to their vendor, and there's zero visibility and liability downstream and disclosure. NIST basics, data transportation, data storage, data processing, those controls don't go all the way through. And I think it's just one of the hugest reasons why we continue to have so many breaches in our industry. I chime in with you 100%. Mike?
I agree. TPRM is kind of scary. This stuff's kind of hard enough to do on its own, and TPRM, you're operating on partial information. That's actually the topic of our October full LinkedIn Live event in a couple of weeks. That'll be pretty cool. That's a great answer. Second question, what's one data breach that stood out to you and why?
I would say it's overall more like big cyber incidents. So I don't know if you know, but in the UK, we've had a lot of cyber incidents recently. So we had Marks and Spencer's and Harrods. We had maybe 3 or 4 in the last maybe four months. Jaguar Land Rover happened only a couple of weeks ago. Another one in the UK. And I think almost all of them were related to the supply chain, third parties. Once again, I think it's something that is very challenging to fix. But once again, if you're not properly trying to vet your vendors and understand your risk posture, you have thousands and thousands of potential entry points for attackers. And we combine that with a little bit of social engineering, like you can get in pretty quickly. And that's really what stood up for me is like how it can, I think M&S, the overall impact was over 50 million. It can really, and you couldn't order for them, like the stocks at some of the stores. I live in London, and I saw that some of the stores, some shelves were completely empty because of it. Huge impact on logistics and supply chain, etc.
Craziness. All right. Next question then. What is the most impactful GRC advice that you ever received?
Yeah, that's a very good question. What I would say is one good advice I had is work on empathy a little bit. The way I would frame it is you always need to think about your problems, which are GRC problems, through the lenses of whoever owns the outcome, risk owner or control owner. I think something all humans have is we think our own kind of photo bubble is the truth, and the way we think through problems is the truth. And I think often when we're like, why is this fix not implemented? Why won't we have this enabled? Or why encryption at rest is not working this way here? And then you put yourself in their shoes and understand their constraints and how they work on and the actual infrastructure and some of the legacy they have to work with, etc., then you may be a little bit more comprehensive in the way you provide advice, and you're more empathetic to the issues they're facing. And I think as GRC professionals, we're very good at telling people what to do. And I think when we think back about the constraints they have to work within, because we also have those constraints, but it's way easier to dismiss the concerns of others instead of thinking back on ours. I think it's really like kind of empathy and just having coffee chat with people and understanding how the work look like in practice. I think it makes you a better GRC pro.
That is true. So I find myself always encouraging people to make a decision, because some people would rather not make a decision in case they fear it might be the wrong decision. And so especially in the GRC space, when you try to standardize and you try to establish workflow and you try to identify controls and then measure against them, sometimes it's hard for that control definition to actually occur, because they're like, well, I'm not sure, maybe somebody in some other department, right? And it's that balance between that empathy that you're calling out. And of course, at some point, hey, we just got to draw a line in the sand. And if it doesn't work, let's change it in half a year. It's okay, right? But we have to make that definition and encourage people to somehow structure their operations in a way that's more measurable.
100%.
That's a good point. Sometimes the organizational leaders will say to the developers, for example, you got to follow what the cybersecurity team or the GRC team says. So then some teams will be like, oh, well, I'm empowered now. I can just tell them what to do and they have to do it. But if you have empathy, everything will turn out better. Like if a task might take them 20 minutes, don't just give them an hour. If it doesn't need to be done for a week, ask for it in a week. And not only that, but it's good to say why you're asking for that. It's like, if you say, give me this, it doesn't work as well as saying, oh, can you run this report? Our biggest client is asking for that, and it'll help us expand the business. It's to show that we value people's time, and we're not just asking them to jump through hoops for the fun of it.
Exactly. I think when you think about giving them the why and understanding why this decision has to be made and what's the outcome, I think you can get a lot more adherence and less likely people would do shadow work and like work around your stuff.
Absolutely. For the fourth question, I have a clue what you do better because I've seen your content quite well and you're awesome with GRC engineering, but what do you do differently that allows you to excel in this field? How would you word that?
I think what has been missing in the field that I was trying to find kind of a niche or like a voice for is all those changes around GRC engineering, a new way of being more closer to how technical controllers work, etc. I think there was a gap in terms of how it worked at enterprise level. So a lot of things work when you're a startup because there's no boundaries, there's a bias for action, there's no guardrails, everyone has a lot of agency to do things, but like having a more engineering driven approach where you have lots of constraints and to access something you need an access request and 15 people need to approve it, and working through is different if you work at an AI native startups compared to working at, I don't know, Vanguard or working at CV. There's like different types of companies, and I wanted my content and my approach to be fitted for these people. I speak to those practitioners. I myself work at a fairly large company as well, and I really, like for me, the biggest win is not when someone who has everything ready does something good, is where you work at a bank that has mainframes and has a very old infrastructure and you can still make a GRC engineering work there. That's really for me the win, because that's where the actual productivity gain and enhanced reporting and insight, that's where it actually happens, because the leap in productivity and impact is way bigger compared to already being in a cloud native space and using GRC automation tools out of the box, etc. It's better, but the gap is not as big.
All right. So last question then. What is the one top thing that businesses can do today to strengthen their cyber GRC posture?
If I could give one example, especially with my GRC engineering bias, it would be standardize your workflows. What I would say is a lot of issues we have is people, especially now age of vibe coding, and people are a lot more empowered to build technical solutions to problems. I think it creates a bias where you build the solution before you understand the problem. because now you can easily get on an AI app or whatever, and then create a prototype for this. I want to connect it to AWS and do X, Y, Z and test those controls. What do you actually need? Like what is the goal? And if you say the way I do control test is like, this is the input, this is the asset, this is the control test description, and these are the systems that check, then maybe the actual automation is maybe looking more like a Zapier-like workflow, if this, then that, or maybe it's just a step automation using some native, I don't know, Office 365 thing. And it's not actually coding something from scratch. I would really see like, if you don't standardize, you can't automate. And code is a way of describing reality in a very standardized fashion. And if your process is like, you have 5 analysts and there's 5 complete different ways of testing and outputs and reporting, then if you don't standardize that, you have 5 different automations. They won't speak to one another and you won't provide any benefits to the business.
And I'm going to actually second that. And 2 situations actually come to mind with that very quickly. The first one is, we all want to use AI, but unless you have that workflow well defined, it's very, very difficult to define the inputs, the process that you're using, and then the intended output for that AI target, right? And even that human in the middle kind of conditioning and that logic for when you need to bring in another opinion or, break a tie. The other thing is, I'm seeing more and more, there are some things that are automatable in the GRC space, but I'm seeing this huge disconnect between published documents and actual controls that are automated, measured, and integrated. What that tells me is all of these templates that are out there, all of these vague, ethereal words, sometimes, occasionally, periodically, like, what does that even mean, right? I mean, is it weekly or is it monthly or is it quarterly? So these vague words make it so that the subjectivity, when you're conducting the audit or you're trying to gather that evidence on a continual basis, you can't, it becomes these subjective words that again need a decision, right? So when you can actually define it in a way that is reflective of your true real operations, not what the template says. Remember, template's a template, and it's used for you to update for your actual real true operation. Only then I think you can have true center of excellence success from a GRC perspective. Close us out, Mike.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. You got to fix the process before you automate that. And Ayoub talks about this probably as well as anyone. Thanks so much for joining us today, Ayoub. Other than LinkedIn, where can people find you?
You can find me on grcengineer.com for the newsletter, and on YouTube, I think it's just GRC Engineer. You'll find the podcast as well. I have lots of interesting guests. So yeah, if you want to check it out, feel free.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thank you for joining us.
No
Glad
worries.
to have you.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.